The Cleveland Browns fell short of expectations in 2021. Coming off an 11-win season that included a win in the playoffs, many predicted the Browns would be representing the AFC in the Super Bowl and perhaps even win the Super Bowl itself. But as we know, that is not what happened, and we're left with more questions and answers about the future of the team. But nevertheless, it's that time of the year, so it's time to do the annual Season in Review video. Once again, I will be using the format of Chris Berman's Fastest 3 Minutes, only this will be longer than 3 minutes, obviously. So without further ado, let's review the 2021 Cleveland Browns season. Week 1 was a playoff rematch against the Kansas City Chiefs. The Browns picked up right where they left off in 2020 and played stellar football the entire first half. They led 22-10 and had all the momentum. But a Nick Chubb fumble and a Jamie Gillan muffed punt is what ultimately made the difference as the Browns melted down in the second half and came up short. In Week 2, the Browns hosted the Houston Texans. It was Tyrod Taylor's return to Cleveland. Tyrod played pretty well and made it look like the Texans had a shot, but he would end up leaving the game with a hamstring injury. The Browns capitalized and took care of business 31-21 as Baker Mayfield nearly had a perfect game passing. Unfortunately, he would suffer a torn labrum while trying to make a tackle on an interception, and this injury would be a problem for the remainder of the year. In Week 3, the Browns hosted the Bears. It was OBJ's return, and OBJ and Baker actually had good chemistry on this day. Odell finished with 5 catches for 77 yards. Myles Garrett had a whopping 4.5 sacks as the Browns defense suffocated rookie Justin Fields. Cleveland went on to win 26-6. In Week 4, the Browns traveled to Minnesota to take on the Vikings. It was a homecoming for Kevin Stefanski, and luckily it was a happy one. The game was a defensive battle with the Browns squeezing out a win 14-7. The only play you probably remember is Baker missing OBJ on a wide open touchdown. The following week, the Browns flew out west to take on the Chargers. This game produced fireworks, but the Browns could not hold on to a 14-point lead in the second half and wound up losing a shootout 47-42. Some notable plays were an OBJ drop on 4th and 2, a 71-yard touchdown by David Njoku, and a very questionable pass interference call on AJ Green. Cleveland dropped to 3-2. In Week 6, the undefeated Arizona Cardinals came to town. The Browns kept it interesting in the first half after a Baker Mayfield Hail Mary, but the Cardinals made it clear in the second half that they were the better team as they wound up humiliating the Browns 37-14. Kareem Hunt suffered a calf injury and would miss quite some time, and Baker further injured his shoulder while falling awkwardly. The Browns fell to 3-3. Just a few days later, the Browns hosted the Broncos on Thursday Night Football. Case Keenum started for an injured Baker Mayfield, and Dearness Johnson got the start at running back for an injured Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. Dearness Johnson was the difference on this night as he finished with 146 yards rushing and a touchdown. Cleveland beat Denver 17-14, improving to 4-3 on the year. In Week 8, the Steelers came to town for a showdown on Halloween. It was a hard-fought, low-scoring game with the first touchdown not coming until the third quarter. The Steelers would come out on top 15-10, with the difference being 2 well-placed feet by Steelers tight end Pat Freiermuth. Jarvis Landry had a rough game, having 2 key drops and a lost fumble in the fourth quarter. Before Week 9 arrived, a major shakeup occurred in Berea. Odell Beckham Jr. was released by the Browns on November 5th after Odell's father posted a video that was critical of Baker Mayfield. 2.5 seasons later, the OBJ experiment came to a miserable end as the Browns decided that a divorce would be best for both parties. But Cleveland couldn't spend too much time dwelling on this as there was still another half of the season to be played. At last, Week 9 arrived and the Browns were down in Cincinnati to take on the Bengals. This was easily Cleveland's best game of the year as they played a complete game of football and absolutely decimated the Bengals. Joe Burrow was sacked 5 times, and Jamar Chase was frustrated by Cleveland's D. The Browns won 41-16 as Baker Mayfield improved to 6-1 all-time against the Bengals. But just when it looked like the Browns were going to go on a roll, Week 10 happened, and talk about a setback. Aside from the opening drive, the Browns were obliterated by the Patriots, losing by a final score of 45-7. It got so bad, our old friend Brian Hoyer came in during mop-up time and led New England on a 95-yard touchdown drive. This was easily one of the worst Browns losses since 1999. In Week 11, the Browns returned home to host the Lions. Cleveland would get out to a 2-touchdown lead, but then take their foot off the pedal and let the winless Lions get back in the game. Fortunately, Nick Chubb was able to run out the clock and the Browns would win 13-10, improving to 6-5 on the year. It was at this point that Cleveland fans were really starting to question whether a battered Baker Mayfield was a better option than Case Keenum. In Week 12, the Browns traveled to Baltimore for a showdown with the Ravens on Sunday Night Football. It was a very ugly game with multiple turnovers. Lamar Jackson threw 4 interceptions, but astonishingly the Browns could only turn those 4 picks into 3 points, and as a result, the Ravens would come out on top 16-10. After the bye week, the Browns took on the Ravens again, only this time at home. Cleveland played lights out in the first half and had a commanding 24-6 lead, but they would let their guard down in the second half and let Ravens backup Tyler Huntley lead a comeback charge. It wound up coming down to the final minute after Baltimore recovered their first onside kick in 20 years, but the Ravens' comeback would come up short as Denzel Ward made a huge play on 4th and 6, securing a 24-22 victory for the Browns. In Week 15, the Browns hosted the Raiders. The game was postponed 2 days as the Browns were missing 22 players, including 9 starters due to COVID-19. Left with no other options, Cleveland was forced to start practice squad player Nick Mullins at quarterback. Cleveland was impacted by missing so many players as they didn't get anything going until the second half and trailed for a large majority of the game. They did come alive and take the lead at the very end, but they couldn't stop Derek Carr when it mattered, and the Raiders won on a 48-yard field goal as time expired. In Week 16, Cleveland traveled to Lambeau Field to play the Packers on Christmas Day. The Browns played well enough to win on this day, but they were not able to overcome 4 Baker Mayfield interceptions. The 4th interception was the most costly as it occurred when the Browns were driving down the field to try and kick a game-winning field goal. Cleveland fell to 7-8 and the playoffs were slipping away. In Week 17, the Browns traveled to Pittsburgh to play the Steelers on Monday Night Football. Ben Roethlisberger, who was playing his last game in Heinz Field, threw the ball 46 times but only had 123 yards to show for it. Baker Mayfield is just as bad, throwing 2 picks and having 5 passes batted down. The game actually went down to the very end, but the Browns' lack of heart on offense is what made it seem like they were out of it the entire game. Pittsburgh won 26-14 as the Browns bowed to Ben Roethlisberger one last time. In the season finale, the Browns hosted the Bengals. Case Keenum started for an injured Baker Mayfield, and the Bengals were resting many starters for the playoffs. The Browns were on the verge of blowing out the Bengals until a Case Keenum fumble was returned for a touchdown. After that, it was a close game until the end, with the Browns having to recover an onside kick at the end. Cleveland won 21-16, finishing the year with an 8-9 record in 3rd place in the AFC North. Obviously, they did not make the playoffs. And that's a wrap on the 2021 Cleveland Browns season. Very disappointing given all the expectations, but I will say if there's any consolation, at least the Browns finished with a respectable record this year. What I mean by that is, usually when the Browns have high expectations going into a season, they end up having an abysmal year winning only 4 to 6 games. That happened in 1995, 2003, 2008, and 2019, just to name a few. But this year they were just about 500 and they were in postseason contention until Week 17, so it could have been much worse, believe it or not. Don't get me wrong, 8-9 isn't acceptable given the level of talent on the roster, but 8-9 by definition isn't embarrassing either. That's all I'm trying to say. One last thought, was anybody else extremely disappointed that we got swept by the Steelers? This was the year we were supposed to really reinvigorate the rivalry and push them around and bully them and finally stick it to them for embarrassing us the last 18 years. But we ended up getting swept, and to make it worse, they weren't even that good of a team. To me, that was one of the toughest things from this past season. Like when you consider we beat Big Ben in the playoffs last year, a sweep of him this year would have been the perfect send-off, and maybe it could have made up for his domination of us the past 18 seasons. But instead he rides off with the last laugh, sweeping the Browns one last time. Just so disappointing. Anyway, that's going to do it for the video. If you haven't already, please hit subscribe, please follow me on Twitter, follow me on Twitch, and please consider supporting me on Patreon. All the links will be in the description. Until next time, I'm Ramen Robbie, and thanks for watching.